When my father died, he left me nothing but an old house on the outskirts of town. My brother got everything: the business, the investments, the respect. He looked at me like I was a loser. At the funeral, while I cried alone by the grave, he was already on the phone closing deals, wearing our father's watch, driving his car. I got the keys to a house in ruins where no one had lived for decades. Cracked walls, floors that groaned under my feet, windows covered in dirt and neglect. My brother laughed in my face when I said I was going to live there. He said I was wasting my life on a ruin while he was building an empire. And for a moment, I believed him. I believed our father had made his choice. One son deserved everything. The other deserved to be forgotten. But 3 weeks later, I went down to the basement to check the heater. The air was freezing. The smell of mold burned my throat. And then, behind a loose brick in the wall, my fingers touched something cold. A metal box, locked, heavy. Inside it was a truth my brother never imagined. And in that moment, everything changed. I stood there in that cold basement, holding the metal box in my trembling hands. Dust floated in the dim light coming through a small window near the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing off the stone walls. The box was heavier than it looked, covered in a thin layer of rust and grime. There was no keyhole, just a small combination lock on the front. 3 numbers. I tried my father's birthday. Nothing. I tried the year he bought this house. Nothing. My fingers were shaking as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. Why would he hide something down here? Why would he leave me this house and not tell me about what was inside it? I sat down on the concrete floor, my back against the damp wall, and stared at that box. For years, I had felt invisible to my father. He and my brother spoke the same language, the language of business, of ambition, of power. I was the daughter who chose art over economics, who wanted to teach instead of compete, who cried at movies and believed in second chances. My father never understood me. Or maybe he did, and that was the problem. Maybe I reminded him of someone he used to be before life hardened him into the man who built an empire, but forgot how to smile. My brother had always been his golden child, the heir, the chosen one, and I had learned to accept it. I stopped waiting for my father's approval years ago. I stopped trying to prove I was worthy of his love. But now, sitting in this forgotten basement with this mysterious box in my lap, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe my father had seen me after all. Maybe this house wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a message. I tried my mother's birthday. Click. The lock opened. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the box, there were documents, old photographs, and a letter with my name written on the envelope in my father's handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. But I had to know. I had to understand why he left me here, why he chose this moment to finally speak to me, and what he had been hiding all these years. I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still clear. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp and precise, just like everything else about him. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I left for you. I know you must be confused. I know your brother has already claimed his victory, and you feel like you have lost. But you haven't. You never could, because you are the only one who truly understood what matters in this life. Your brother sees money, power, control. You see people, hearts, truth. That is why I gave you this house. Not because it is worthless, but because it holds everything that is truly valuable. I stopped reading. My eyes were burning with tears. I read those lines again and again. My father had seen me. He had understood. All those years I thought I was invisible to him, he had been watching. He had been waiting for the right moment to tell me. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. This house was built by my grandfather, your great-grandfather, in 1932. It was the first thing our family ever owned. Before the business, before the wealth, before everything your brother now controls, there was this house. It represents something your brother will never understand. The value of roots, of history, of knowing where you came from. Inside these walls, there are secrets I never told anyone. Secrets about our family, about sacrifices made, about choices that shaped all of our lives. I am giving you the truth, my daughter, and with it, the power to decide what comes next. My hands were shaking. What secrets? What truth? I looked back into the box. Beneath the letter were old photographs, black and white images of people I didn't recognize. A young couple standing in front of this very house, a man in a military uniform, a woman holding a baby. And then I saw it. A photograph of my father as a young boy standing next to a man who looked exactly like him. But it wasn't his father. It was someone else. Someone whose face I had seen before but couldn't place. I turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded pencil, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. Your real grandfather. I dropped the photograph. My heart was racing. What did that mean? Who was this man? And why had my father hidden this from us our entire lives? I looked back at the letter, my hands trembling, searching for answers. But the letter ended there. No explanation, no closure. Just a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My brother had no idea what he had lost. I sat on that cold basement floor for what felt like hours, staring at the photograph. The man in the picture had my father's eyes, his strong jawline, the same serious expression, but he was a stranger, a ghost from a past no one had ever spoken about. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, like everything I had believed about my family was built on lies. I pulled out more photographs from the box. There were dozens of them, images of a life I never knew existed, a small farmhouse in the countryside, children playing in a dirt yard, a woman with sad eyes standing in a doorway, and in almost every photo, that man, the one labeled as my real grandfather. He appeared over and over, always serious, always watching, as if he knew his image would one day be discovered and questioned. I found a birth certificate. It was old, fragile, dated 1948. The name on it was my father's, but the parents listed were not the grandparents I had grown up hearing stories about. The mother's name was different. The father's name was the man in the photographs. I felt sick. How was this possible? Why had my father hidden this? And more importantly, did my brother know? I thought about all the times my father had told us stories about his childhood, about his parents who worked hard and built the family business from nothing, about values, legacy, honor. Were those stories lies? Or were they just pieces of a truth he had carefully edited to protect us from something darker? I picked up another document. It was a property deed, dated 1976. The house I was sitting in had been transferred to my father's name, but not by his parents. It had been transferred by someone named Elena Vasquez. I had never heard that name before. I searched through the box frantically, looking for more clues, more answers. And then I found a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath everything else. It was a handwritten note, not from my father, but from a woman. The handwriting was delicate, shaky, as if written by someone old or ill. It read, "Thomas, I kept my promise. I never told them the truth, but you must. They deserve to know who they really are. This house is their birthright, not the empire you built on lies. Give it to the one who will understand, the one who has your mother's heart. I read it 3 times. My chest felt tight. My mother's heart. My father had chosen me because I reminded him of someone from this hidden past, someone named Elena. I stood up, my legs weak, and looked around the basement with new eyes. This house wasn't just old. It wasn't just forgotten. It was a vault, a place where my father had buried the truth about who we really were. And my brother, with all his arrogance and greed, had no idea that the real inheritance was never the business. It was this, the truth. And now, it was mine to uncover. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table upstairs with all the photographs and documents spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. The house creaked and groaned around me as if it too was trying to tell me its secrets. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound felt like a whisper from the past. I kept staring at the note from Elena. Give it to the one who will understand, the one who has your mother's heart. My father's mother, my grandmother, or at least the woman I had always believed was my grandmother. But according to the birth certificate, that wasn't true. My real grandmother was someone else, someone my father had erased from our family history. I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over my brother's name. Part of me wanted to call him, to throw all of this in his face, to watch him realize that he didn't know our father as well as he thought. But I stopped. Something told me not to. Not yet. If I revealed what I had found too soon, he would find a way to take it from me. He always did. He would hire lawyers, twist the truth, claim the documents were fake or irrelevant. No, I needed to understand everything first. I needed to be ready. I decided to start with the name, Elena Vasquez. I opened my laptop and searched for her, but there were thousands of results, none of them useful. I added my father's name to the search. Still nothing. I tried the address of the house, and then, finally, something appeared. A small article from a local newspaper dated 1973. The headline read, "Local woman donates property to family in need." I clicked on it. The article was short, barely 3 paragraphs, but it mentioned Elena Vasquez by name. It said she had been a widow who lived alone in a house on the edge of town, and that before her death, she had transferred ownership of her property to a young man named Thomas, who had cared for her in her final years. Thomas. My father. The article described him as a devoted son, though it never clarified if he was her biological son or something else. My throat tightened. A devoted son? But my father had always said his mother died when he was a teenager, long before 1973. So who was Elena, and why had she given him this house? I kept digging. I found an obituary. Elena Vasquez died March 1976, age 72. Survived by no immediate family. I felt a chill run down my spine. No immediate family? But she had given everything to my father. Why? What connected them? I looked back at the photographs. One of them showed the woman with sad eyes standing in the doorway. I looked closer. She was wearing a necklace, a small silver cross. I had seen that necklace before. In a box of my father's belongings. I had found it years ago and asked him about it, but he had brushed me off, saying it was just an old trinket. But it wasn't. It was hers. It was Elena's. And my father had kept it all these years. He had carried her memory with him, hidden, protected, sacred. And now I understood. Elena wasn't just a stranger who gave him a house. She was family. The real family. The one he had been forced to forget. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. I hadn't slept more than an hour, but adrenaline kept me alert. I needed official documents, proof, something that would connect all the pieces I had found. The woman behind the desk looked bored as I explained what I was looking for. Birth records, property transfers, anything related to Elena Vasquez or my father from the 1940s through the 70s. She disappeared into a back room for nearly 30 minutes. When she returned, she was holding a thin folder. She slid it across the counter without a word. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of documents I had already seen, and one I hadn't, a marriage certificate, dated June 1947. The names made my hands freeze. Elena Vasquez and Richard Monroe. Richard Monroe. That was my grandfather's name. The man I had grown up being told was my father's father. But the dates didn't match. According to family stories, Richard had married my grandmother, a woman named Margaret, in 1946. They had my father in 1948. But this certificate showed Richard had married Elena a year later. How could he have been married to two women? I felt dizzy. I asked the clerk if there were divorce records. She checked. There were none. No divorce between Richard and Elena. No divorce between Richard and Margaret either, because Margaret never existed. At least, not in the way I had been told. I left the office with my head spinning. I sat in my car and tried to piece it together. Richard Monroe had married Elena Vasquez. They had a child. That child was my father. But somewhere along the way, the story changed. Richard disappeared from my father's life, and Elena became a secret. My father had been raised by Elena alone, in that old house until she died and left it to him. And then my father built a new life, a new identity. He created a fictional version of his past, one where his parents were respectable, successful, whole. He erased Elena. He erased the truth. But why? What had Richard done? Why had my father been so ashamed of where he came from that he rewrote his entire history? I drove back to the house. I needed to search more carefully. There had to be something else in that basement, something that explained what had happened to Richard, why Elena had raised my father alone, why my father had spent his whole life running from the truth. I went back down into the cold darkness. I moved boxes, old furniture, broken tools. And then in the corner, behind a stack of rotting wood, I found another box. Smaller, older. I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Elena, all from the same person, Richard Monroe. I pulled one out and read the first line. My dearest Elena, I am so sorry. I am not the man you thought I was. I have done terrible things, and I can never come back. Please tell our son I loved him, even if I was too weak to stay. My chest tightened. I pulled out another letter, and another. They were all the same. Apologies, confessions, a man drowning in guilt, writing to a woman he had abandoned. And in the final letter, dated 1951, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. They will come looking for me. When they do, burn everything. Protect our son. Let him become someone new, someone better, someone who will never have to carry my sins. I dropped the letter. My grandfather was a criminal, a man on the run, and my father had spent his entire life hiding from that shadow. I sat in that basement surrounded by letters from a man I never knew, a man whose blood ran through my veins. And I felt something break inside me. My entire life had been built on a lie. My father's success, his obsession with reputation, his need to control everything. It all made sense now. He wasn't just building a business. He was building a wall between himself and the past, between us and the truth. I thought about my brother, how he worshipped our father's legacy, how he wore it like armor, how he believed he was heir to something noble and earned, but it was all fiction. Our family empire was built by a man desperate to prove he was nothing like his father. A man so ashamed of his origins that he erased them completely. I read more letters. Richard had been involved in something dark. He never said exactly what, but there were references to debts, to dangerous men, to choices that couldn't be undone. In one letter, he mentioned leaving the state, changing his name, starting over somewhere no one would find him. He begged Elena to forget him, to tell their son he was dead, to give the boy a chance at a clean life. And that's exactly what she did. Elena raised my father alone in that house. She worked, she sacrificed, she loved him fiercely. And when my father became successful, when he built his business and his new identity, he never forgot her. He kept her memory locked away in this house, in these boxes, in the shadows. He couldn't acknowledge her publicly without risking questions, without someone digging into his past and discovering Richard. So he created a false history. He invented grandparents who didn't exist. He gave us a bloodline we could be proud of. But he gave me this house. He gave me the truth. Why? I found my answer in the last document at the bottom of the box. It was a legal paper dated just 6 months before my father died. A second will. Not the one my brother's lawyers had read at the official hearing, but another one. This one was handwritten, signed by my father and witnessed by someone I didn't recognize. It was short and direct. To my daughter, I leave the house on Elm Street and everything within it. She alone will understand why I hid the truth. She alone has the compassion to forgive what I could not, and she alone will decide whether our family's real story should remain buried or finally be told. The business, the money, the legacy I built, they are illusions. This house is real. It is where I came from. It is who I truly was. And now it belongs to the only person I trust to honor it. Tears streamed down my face. My father had chosen me, not because I was weak or sentimental, but because I was strong enough to carry the truth. He knew my brother would never accept it, would never forgive him for being the son of a criminal, for coming from nothing. But he believed I would. He believed I could hold both the beauty and the ugliness of our history and still love him. And he was right. I did. I loved him more in that moment than I ever had when he was alive. Because now, I understood him. I understood his silence, his distance, his impossible standards. He had been protecting us, protecting himself. And in the end, he trusted me with the one thing he could never trust anyone else with: the truth. I spent the next 2 days alone in that house, reading every letter, studying every photograph, memorizing every detail of the life my father had hidden. I learned that Elena had been a seamstress, that she had worked 16-hour days to keep food on the table. I learned that my father had been bullied as a child for wearing old clothes and living in the poor part of town. I learned that he had lied about his age to get his first job at 14, and that every dollar he made went toward buying books, learning, climbing out of the poverty that had trapped his mother. He had been ashamed, not of Elena, but of the circumstances, of the whispers, of the judgment. And when Richard's past finally caught up with him, when rumors started circulating about a man on the run, a criminal who had abandoned his family, my father made a choice. He cut all ties to that name, to that history. He became someone new, and he made sure no one, not even his own children, would ever have to carry the weight of Richard Monroe's sins. But the weight had followed him anyway. I could see it in the letters he had written to Elena before she died, letters I found tucked in a separate envelope. He apologized to her constantly. He told her he wished he could tell the world how strong she was, how much she had sacrificed. But he couldn't. The business was growing. His reputation was everything. If people knew the truth, they would see him differently. They would question his success. They would wonder if he was like his father, a man who couldn't be trusted. So he stayed silent, and Elena understood. She never asked him to acknowledge her. She never demanded recognition. She simply loved him. And when she died, she left him the house, the only inheritance she had, with a note asking him to remember where he came from, to never forget that real strength wasn't built on lies, but on surviving the truth. My father had kept that note. He had kept everything, and now it was all mine. I thought about calling my brother again, but what would I say? That the fortune he was so proud of came from a man running from his past? That our grandfather was a criminal? That the legacy he worshipped was built on shame and reinvention? He would never believe me, or worse, he would believe me and hate our father for it. He would see it as weakness, as something to be buried even deeper. No, I wouldn't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I decided to do what my father couldn't. I would honor Elena. I would restore this house, not as a monument to the past, but as a reminder that we all come from somewhere, that our beginnings don't define us, but they shape us, that there is no shame in struggle, only in forgetting those who fought for us. I started small. I cleaned the floors, washed the windows, repaired the broken shutters, and as I worked, I felt my father's presence in every corner. I felt Elena's strength in the walls. I felt the weight of secrets lifting, replaced by something lighter. Purpose, peace, truth. And then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was my brother. His voice was sharp, angry. He said he had heard I was fixing up the old house. He said people were talking. He said I was embarrassing the family by living in that dump. He demanded I sell it and move on. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, I said no. My brother arrived at the house 3 days later. He didn't knock. He just walked in like he owned the place, his expensive shoes clicking against the freshly cleaned floors. He looked around with disgust. His lip curled as if the very air offended him. He was wearing our father's watch. I noticed it immediately. It made my stomach turn. "You can't be serious," he said. "You're actually living here? This place is falling apart. It's an embarrassment. Do you have any idea what people are saying? They're asking why my sister is living in poverty while I'm running a multi-million-dollar company. It makes me look bad." I stared at him. "That's what you're worried about? How it makes you look?" He crossed his arms. "I'm trying to protect our family's reputation, something you clearly don't care about. Look, I'll make this simple. I'll buy the house from you, double whatever it's worth. You can get a nice condo somewhere, start fresh, and we can tear this place down before it becomes a bigger problem." I felt my hands clench into fists. "This house isn't for sale." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Of course it is. Everything's for sale. You're just being stubborn because you're still mad about the will. But Dad knew what he was doing. He gave me the business because I could handle it. He gave you this because, let's be honest, what else were you going to do with your life?" I stepped closer to him. My voice was calm, but every word was laced with steel. "You have no idea what Dad gave me. You think you got everything, but you didn't. You got the illusion. I got the truth." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I walked over to the kitchen table where I had placed the metal box, now empty, except for one item, the photograph of Richard Monroe. I picked it up and held it out to him. "Do you know who this man is?" He barely glanced at it. "No. Should I?" "That's our real grandfather, not the man Dad told us about, not the invented success story. This man, Richard Monroe, a criminal who abandoned his family and left our father to grow up in poverty, right here, in this house." My brother's face went pale. He took the photograph from my hand, staring at it like it might bite him. "You're lying." I'm not. Dad kept all the records, birth certificates, letters, everything. Elena Vasquez, the woman who raised him, was his real mother. She lived here, she died here, and Dad spent his entire life hiding it because he was ashamed. Ashamed that he came from nothing. Ashamed that his father was a criminal on the run. Ashamed that everything he built was built to escape the truth. His hands were shaking. He looked at me, then at the photograph, then back at me. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that the empire you're so proud of was built on lies. Dad wasn't a self-made man. He was a terrified boy trying to outrun his past. And he succeeded. He created a new identity, a new legacy. But it was never real. This house is real. This history is real. And Dad left it to me because he knew you could never handle it. He threw the photograph on the table. I don't believe you. You're making this up to hurt me, to take something away from me. I shook my head. I don't need to take anything from you. You already have nothing. You have money, sure. You have a company, but you don't have the truth. You don't know who you really are, and that's the saddest inheritance of all. He stood there, speechless, his face red with anger and humiliation. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. I stood alone in the quiet house, my heart pounding. I had done it. I had told him the truth. And now there was no going back. For weeks, I heard nothing from my brother. No calls, no messages, nothing. It was as if he had vanished from my life completely. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt sad. We had never been close, but he was still my brother. And now, the truth I had given him had created a canyon between us that might never be crossed. I continued working on the house. I painted the walls, I fixed the roof, I planted flowers in the front yard where Elena had once kept a small garden. With every repair, I felt closer to her, closer to my father, closer to the parts of myself I had always kept hidden. I realized I had spent my whole life trying to fit into a family that didn't understand me. But now, in this house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I finally felt like I belonged. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a car pulled up. I didn't recognize it at first, but when the door opened, my brother stepped out. He looked different, thinner, tired. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something I had never seen before: uncertainty. He walked slowly toward me, his hands in his pockets. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the house. "You've done a lot of work," he said quietly. I nodded. It needed it. He sat down on the steps beside me, keeping a distance, as if afraid to get too close. "I've been doing some research," he said, "about Richard Monroe, about Elena. I hired someone to dig up everything they could find." I stayed silent, waiting. "You were right," he continued, "about all of it. I found court records, arrest warrants. Richard was involved in illegal gambling, fraud, maybe worse. He disappeared in 1951 and was never found. Elena spent the rest of her life raising Dad alone. And Dad, he built everything we have by running from that legacy." He paused, his voice breaking. "I always thought I knew him. I thought he and I were the same, ambitious, driven, focused. But I didn't know him at all. I didn't know what he carried. I didn't know how hard he fought just to be someone different." I looked at him. "And now you do." He nodded, wiping his eyes quickly, as if embarrassed by his own tears. "I was angry at you for telling me. I thought you were trying to destroy everything, but you weren't. You were trying to save me from living the same lie he did." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He took a deep breath. "I don't know how to run that company anymore. Every time I sit in his office, I feel like a fraud, like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, just like he was." "You're not a fraud," I said quietly. "You're just finally seeing the whole picture." He looked at me, his eyes red. "What do I do now?" I shrugged. "That's up to you. You can keep pretending, keep running, or you can accept that we come from broken people who did their best, and maybe that's enough." He was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up, brushing the dust off his pants. "Can I come back?" he asked. "To help with the house." I looked up at him, surprised. "You want to help?" He nodded. "I think I need to. I need to understand where we really came from. I need to stop running." I smiled, the first real smile I had felt in weeks. "Yeah, you can come back." He gave me a small, sad smile in return. "Thanks." And then he left. But this time, it felt different. This time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us had ever had before. The truth. And maybe, eventually, forgiveness. My brother came back the following Saturday. He arrived early in the morning, dressed in old jeans and a faded t-shirt I had never seen him wear before. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, like a man trying on a new identity. But he was there, and that was enough. We worked side by side in silence at first. I showed him how to sand the old wooden banister on the staircase. He was clumsy at it, too used to giving orders instead of using his hands. But he kept going. He didn't complain. He didn't check his phone every 5 minutes. He just worked. After a few hours, he stopped and looked around. "This house is bigger than I ought," he said. "When I was here before, I only saw the decay. I didn't see the bones of it, the structure. It's solid." I nodded. "Elena built a good life here. Even when she had nothing, she made it a home." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I found something else in my research." I looked at him. "Elena had a sister. Her name was Carmen. She's still alive. She lives in a nursing home about 2 hours from here. She's 94 years old." My heart skipped. "She knew Elena?" He nodded. "I called the home. They said she still has good days where her memory is clear. I thought maybe we could visit her, ask her about our father, about Richard, about everything we don't know." I felt a surge of emotion. Yes, we should go. The next day, we drove together to the nursing home. It was a quiet place, clean and calm, with gardens outside and soft music playing in the halls. A nurse led us to a small room where an elderly woman sat in a chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the day. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "Carmen," my brother said gently, "we're Thomas's children." Her eyes widened. She stared at us for a long moment, and then tears filled her eyes. "Thomas, my Elena's boy." I knelt beside her chair. "Yes, we wanted to ask you about her, about our father, about our family." She reached out and touched my face with a trembling hand. "You look like her," she said softly. "You have her kindness in your eyes." I felt tears sting my own eyes. "Can you tell us about her? About what happened?" Carmen nodded slowly. "Elena was the strongest woman I ever knew. When Richard left, everyone told her to give up the baby, to start over. But she refused. She said that boy was hers, and she would raise him no matter what. She worked every day of her life to give him a chance. And when he grew up and became successful, she never asked him anything. She just loved him." "Why did Richard leave?" my brother asked. Carmen's face darkened. "Richard was a weak man. He made bad choices, owed money to dangerous people. When they came looking for him, he ran. He didn't think about what he was leaving behind. Elena forgave him, But she never forgot. She raised Thomas to be everything Richard wasn't. Honest, strong, loyal. And our father, I said quietly, did he ever talk about her? About his past? Carmen smiled sadly. He came to see her every week until she died. But he never told anyone. He was ashamed, not of her, but of what people would think. Elena understood. She told him to build his life to protect his children from the judgment she had endured, and he did. My brother's voice was thick with emotion. She sounds like an incredible woman. Carmen looked at him. She was. And your father was a good man. He carried pain his whole life, but he never let it destroy him. He turned it into something beautiful, into you. We stayed with Carmen for hours, listening to stories, filling in the gaps of our history. And when we finally left, my brother and I sat in the car in silence, both of us overwhelmed. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "For what?" "For not seeing you, for not understanding what Dad was trying to teach us. You got the real inheritance, the one that mattered." I reached over and took his hand. We both did. We just had to find it together. 6 months later, the house was finished. It stood proudly on the corner of Elm Street, its walls freshly painted, its windows gleaming in the sunlight, its garden blooming with the same flowers Elena had once planted. It was no longer a relic of the past. It was a bridge between what was and what could be. My brother and I stood on the porch together, looking at the sign we had just hung by the front door. The Elena Vasquez Community Center. A place where anyone could come to learn a trade, take a class, find support. A place built on the foundation of resilience, sacrifice, and love. A place that honored the woman who gave everything so that we could have a future. "This feels right," my brother said quietly. "Dad would have wanted this." I nodded. He spent his whole life hiding her. Now, the whole world will know her name. We had used some of the money from the business to fund the center. My brother insisted. He said it was the only way he could sleep at night, knowing that the empire built on shame was finally being used to create something honest, something real. People started arriving for the opening ceremony. Neighbors, strangers, people who had heard the story and wanted to be part of something meaningful. Carmen was there too, in a wheelchair, smiling with tears in her eyes. She held my hand tightly as I gave a short speech about Elena, about my father, about the importance of remembering where we come from. I didn't mention Richard. I didn't talk about the crime or the abandonment. That wasn't the story that mattered. What mattered was that a single mother raised a boy with nothing but love and determination. And that boy had become a man who, despite his fears and his secrets, had left behind something beautiful for his children to discover. After the ceremony, my brother and I sat together on the porch steps, just like we had months before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Everything felt different now, lighter, clearer. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found that box?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. I think I would have spent my whole life feeling invisible, feeling like I wasn't enough. But now, I know the truth. I was always enough. Dav saw that. Elena saw that. And now, finally, I see it too. My brother smiled. I see it too. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the world move around us. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about the stories we carry, the truths we uncover, and the courage we find to honor those who came before us. My father had given me more than a house. He had given me a choice, To run from the past like he did, or to embrace it, to hide the truth, or to let it set me free. I chose freedom. And in doing so, I have found something I never expected: peace, purpose, and a connection to a family I never knew I had, but had been waiting for me all along. Sometimes the most valuable things we inherit are not the ones we can see. They are the ones we feel. The lessons, the love, the strength to carry on when everything feels broken. Elena taught me that. My father taught me that. And now, standing in the house that held all of our secrets, I was ready to teach it to the world. Because some stories deserve to be told. Some truths deserve to be honored. And some inheritances are worth more than gold.